game is afoot in the latest title in the adventures of Sherlock Holmes game series, developed by Frogwares and published by Focus Home Interactive for PC, PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, and jumping into the next generation on PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. With the jump into the new console generation, this game series has improved in a great number of ways that not only take advantage of the new console hardware to produce better graphics, but the gameplay elements are a lot more sophisticated too. A mechanic that seems to be inspired by the BBC series Sherlock, floating text now hovers over items of interest, showing the progression of Holmes' thoughts, whether he is guessing who is making the footsteps leading up to his apartment, or wondering why rubble would fall in a particular way. There are also flavours of Guy Ritchie's Sherlock Holmes in the grittier, faster tone of the game compared to the rest of this series. You would think that these comparisons make the game feel a little derivative, but I would say that Frogwares has picked the perfect elements of the 21st century interpretations of Arthur Conan Doyle's detective to translate into engaging and thoughtful gameplay.
Holmes, will you stop that? You are utterly mad.
Looking at the promotional materials and even a selection of the available costumes, it is easy to see that the game was intentionally marketed as a new game with a modern style. One look at the box art and you would be forgiven for thinking that the game has nothing to do with Sherlock Holmes, as his clothing appears to be from much later, the mid-20th century, and the big, bright title, Crimes and Punishments, almost completely eclipses the small, dark Sherlock Holmes below. As a fan of this series, I have to say that I found this to be a little misleading. I wondered if the game would feature a new, contemporary Holmes, or even if the game would be in the Frogwares series at all.
Mr. Holmes, Inspector Lestrade is here to see you.
Mr. Holmes is unable to see anyone at the moment. He is unwell.
A good day, Inspector.
My concerns were laid to rest very early into the game, when the familiar voices, 221B, and faithful writing made themselves clear. The Baker Street flat is much more detailed than before, with the messy clutter that you would not have associated with the homes in previous games, but works wonderfully with a new stylistic refresh of the series. The locations, controls, and general investigations are still the same old, tried and tested formula. In many ways, it feels like the previous game, The Testament of Sherlock Holmes, so fans of the old series will easily jump in and get to deducing. In fact, fans of adventure games in general will easily get to grips with the thorough interrogations and ruthless inspection that is often required. I was reminded of the Broken Sword game series on a few occasions, particularly during a case that delved into ancient rituals and tomb raiding.
Mr. Holmes?
So I've told you how the game feels, and that it is an improved iteration in the series. However, what is actually new? The player is treated to a few fantastic features that dramatically improve playability. Further from the old ability to swap from third person to first person to take a better look at things, there are two more viewing modes available. Sherlock Vision shows us objects or areas that stand out to the detective, things that would be of little interest to the casual observer. Very handy, and instead of having to use the vision over every inch of a crime scene, they give you prompts for specific areas, which is nice. The second new vision is an interpretation of Sherlock's imagination. This allows Sherlock to visualise the events of the case for you to see how things used to, or potentially could, appear.
Holmes, what can we do to make the steam whistle work?
It is elementary, my dear Watson. We shall need a fire extinguisher.
Sherlock Holmes is also known for his ability to costume himself expertly to fit into almost any persona required. Right from the beginning, you have access to Holmes' wardrobe and makeup desk, allowing you to apply enough facial hair to make him almost unrecognisable. In this wardrobe are a number of fancy suits and costumes. While this is just a nice little thing, the entire game is filled with nice points of game direction, whether it is how a character responds to Holmes' questions, or even what is first noticed when meeting a new suspect. This part is great. The beautifully detailed character models are showcased when Holmes makes a profile for every person he meets. The camera follows a set track around the person and you pick out the features to fill the profile. Things that you discover here can affect conversations later. There is a mechanic where Sherlock can interrupt a statement to pull out evidence to the contrary. Compared to perhaps the most famous example of video game interrogation, Rockstar's L.A. Noire, this is a lot easier to use, and the clues are well defined enough to cause you to make very few mistakes, if any at all. Again, another great improvement to the series that streamlines the flow of the cases, which could otherwise be dangerously tedious.
Constable, we have finished with the body.
We don't have many leads here.
What concerns me is that we still have to find the murder weapon.
Adventure games, from point-and-click classics to hidden object affairs, often suffer from tedium. Crimes and Punishments is an exceptionally well-considered game. Investigative games like this often lead you to useless objects thanks to poor design or unconsidered evidence. This is not the case at all with this game. The well-designed destinations lead you to important objects that stand out enough to be noticed, yet not enough to be too obvious, which would break the immersion. Navigating the case files is simple. The tabs are clear and everything you need is presented straight away. Evidence is brief and to the point and has useful icons to let you know where they need to be used. This is a big feature and saved me from getting lost and wasting time often. For instance, if I found a gentleman's pocket watch which has the dialogue icon over it, then I know that I'll need to talk to somebody about it later, or even use it as evidence in an interrogation. Sherlock's journal is one of the easiest and most intuitive ways to store and use evidence that I've seen in video games.
Do you remember at what time you found your husband's body?
In the morning, at around 7 o'clock. I noticed the cabin door was open, but I didn't go in to take a look, for I knew my husband would not have liked it.
Deductions are the next large improvements in the formula. When enough evidence is ascertained for a deduction to be made, you're invited to open the deduction space and join two known facts together to form a deduction. These are shown in the form of cerebral synapses that automatically link together to form questions that need answering or even conclusions to the case. Some deductions have multiple choices that lead to different conclusions. Drawing from the questions of morality in Dostoevsky's novel Crime and Punishment, which Sherlock reads on occasion in the game, there is a focus on both finding the correct culprit and then punishing him or her appropriately. Whether you leave it to Lestrade to book them or absolve them of their crimes, these are just two of many possible outcomes. The game begs for replays, with each case containing multiple outcomes. I found the first case to contain a touch of genius after the deduction space clearly led to one person being the murderer, and I could have easily accepted that it was him and closed the case there. However, I knew that something wasn't quite right. There was one piece of evidence that didn't fit into the puzzle, and as I said, this game is exceptionally well considered, so every piece fits. I decided to persist, and was rewarded with more characters, locations, and evidence to engross myself with before I managed to wrap up the case in a much more satisfactory way. Upon doing so, the game asks if you're happy with your choice, and then will show you the percentage of other players from an online database that chose the same ending as you did. Another nice little touch which I appreciated.
But you can't! I'm not... It's a terrible mistake!
Enough! You can explain all of that to the judge. You're coming with me to the yard.
The game isn't without its flaws. There were a few too many glitches, and the beautiful level design does flake around the edges where design shortcuts have been made, but nothing in my entire playthrough ruined the experience, or made the cases unsolvable, thankfully. Early into the game I found a few puzzles far too simple, but it prevented anything from being frustrating. Many different puzzle game mechanics are brought into play, from literally piecing a 3D puzzle together to realigning familiar scents to form a picture of the source of the smell. Each one was easy to get into and relatively quick to solve. The game on the whole does hold your hand as often as possible to stop you from getting off course, but the levels are open and there is still a requirement for the player to do some actual thinking. Not a difficult request for anyone who plays adventure games, and paying attention to absolutely everything proves to be very rewarding, and gets the cases solved sooner.
Good day. To whom am I speaking?
My name is Sherlock Holmes, and this is...
Are you a representative of this damned railway company?
For me, Sherlock Holmes' Crime and Punishment is a strong 6 out of 8. It is certainly an above average game and perhaps the best in its genre. It has benefited from dozens of improvements that guide the player to help keep the flow from slowing to a stop, and improvements that make the game accessible to people who may be unfamiliar with the genre, or players who have been put off by the slew of hidden object games that have swarmed the market since this series' simple beginnings in the early 2000s. Definitely give this game a play if you're a fan of crime thrillers or puzzle games, but stay away if you want a game that is faster, edgier, and more modern. Thank you for watching. I've been Petey with The Killer Bits, and you can follow us on the Facebooks at facebook.com/thekillerbits, or on Twitter at twitter.com/thekillerbits, and please subscribe to our channel here at youtube.com/thekillerbits. Bye!